This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to the OI podcast, the Otago Institute podcast, in-depth conversations with experts from the worlds of arts, sciences and mataranga Māori. Brought to you by the Otago Institute, the Otago branch of the Royal Society for Arts and Sciences. Kia ora, I'm Dr. Barb.
Kia ora, I'm Trudi.
And today in the studio we have Rauhina Scott-Fyfe.
Hi, yep, kia ora. Kia ora. Rauhina Scott-Fyfe. Kai Tahu, Kāti, Māmoe, and Hocken collections, te Whare Taoka or Hākena.
Cool. So tell us about your role.
What is your role first things first, would you like to just mihi to the audience there, because of course this goes live, but it's also on podcast. So at this point we just say, if you'd like to do just a mihi normal to your audience, then feel free to.
Well, e mihi ana ki a koutou, e whakarongo nei, a big mihi to all of you listening today.
Kia ora. Kia ora. Hocken collection. So the Hocken collections, what does the Hocken collection actually deal with? How is it different from other kind of libraries around Dunedin or the world?
Well, it's a special research collection, and I'm constantly surprised by how many people don't know about the Hocken collections, or they might know it as the Hocken Library. And they don't know that they can go there. So it's a public library. It's a specialist research library, archive and art gallery.
Oh, and art gallery. See that? Yep. New information there.
And it comes under the university library, but because the basis of the collection was donated to the people of New Zealand by Dr. Thomas Moreland Hocken, he specified that he wanted it to always be publicly accessible.
Right.
So anyone can go in there, bring some photo ID and get a card for free and be a Hocken reader. But It is different from your usual public libraries in that you can't take anything away from the library. Everything has to be viewed on site in the reading room or in the art
But I imagine
space.
they're quite nice spaces though, aren't they, to sort of sit and read?
Yeah. And the people are nice too.
Yeah, of course.
Shout out to the people at the Hocken.
Shout out to my colleagues.
Yeah, no, and really helpful as well, because I think that and that's a thing. Oh, sorry. I think that's a thing that people often don't kind of credit. Like a library it's not the building, it's the people that are in it as much, and they're really helpful. And any time I've ever had anything to do with librarians, apart from possibly the librarian I had at school when I was like 11.
Well, when people go into the Hocken Library, they go in, and if they don't know what it's like, they might go in and they say, "Where are all the books?" Because most of the books are in a closed stack, so you can't usually go in there. But
so you can't browse the bookshelves and say, "Oh, I want that one," or sort of just be kind of clicked. You have to go there and think, "Okay, I've got a purpose in mind. I want to know about something."
That's right.
Specific.
Can you go on with a list, like a research list? Like I trolled through all the Maryland worker journals from the 1920s and 30s, so you could go in and say, "I want copies of these from XYZ dates," and you might have to come back, of course.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. We always have staff there to help you as well. So we often get people just walking in and saying, "I'm researching this. Can you help me find things?" And we often have a lot of published material, newspapers, periodicals, books, but also unpublished material. So we've got
like letters and diaries and things.
Letters, diaries, all sorts of, manuscripts that haven't been published, papers, working papers, research papers.
I guess all the stuff that goes behind when people are researching a book, like they have this tower of their notes and stuff, maybe, and then the book becomes really famous.
Yeah, and we're also the official repository for lots of organisations. So businesses, schools, the churches.
So what sort of things do you get from them when you say you're the official repository? What sort of things do they deposit there?
So one example is we're the repository for the Diocese of Dunedin, the Anglican diocese that covers Otago and Southland.
Right.
And so things like their baptism books, marriage registers, all that kind of thing we hold there.
Oh, that's good, because then if a tiny little church burns down, God, hopefully it doesn't. But I mean, these things happen.
Say, God forbid.
I was. I stopped myself. But yeah, I mean, these things happen, don't they? And if the only copy of all of that information is there, then of course it's gone, right? So you hold a second copy. I guess there's still something at the church, or
we try and hold the original copies,
right?
Usually, so yeah, we look after them in a place that is trying to stop. We're there. The building is quite a special building in that it is temperature controlled, humidity controlled. We put things in packaging that means that we're trying to make sure it lasts as long as possible.
So I imagine you have quite strict biosecurity rules there as well, just like the
and security and fire, and all of that kind of thing. Yeah,
flood and
because you wouldn't want sprinklers coming on if there's a fire.
No, but sprinklers you can save. You can save paper from water damage. You can't save paper once it's burnt.
No,
that's
true.
interesting. Yeah, no.
I just thought you might need some sort of
gas or something.
Suppression
Suck the oxygen out.
Yeah.
So I'm not a complete expert on
We're digressing.
So what is your role there at the Hocken?
So I'm part of the archives team.
Right.
My role is Māori Archivist.
Right.
And I started in this role at the end of 2020 with a kind of some specific projects that were looking at the fact that historically archives have been described in a certain way and things have been prioritised in a certain way as well, which has generally had a worldview, or like the Pākehā worldview has been the priority.
Right.
So, but we also have some really significant things relating to Māori.
Right. And is it specific to Otago and Otago Southland area, or is it like more national, or is it more like significant to here, Otago Southland?
Our collection as a whole looks at Otago and Southland, but Dr. Hocken himself collected things from across Aotearoa and the Pacific.
Right.
So there's things in our collection that relate to Māori that are not just Kaitahu based here.
Right.
Though we do have more things, I guess,
so
that
it's
are
focused on that.
Because when people donate or bring their archives into a place, they often bring them to somewhere that is close by or relates to them,
or relates to the information that they're donating.
Absolutely,
I know. So that makes total sense. So it's really like, I'm imagining that there's a lot of genealogy type stuff there, just with you talking about birth records and marriage records and stuff, and people trying to research their family and connections and what happened to people and just kind of the lives of people.
We do get a lot of people coming in. I guess that's one of the main draws for some people when they're researching history, is researching their own family history.
Yeah.
And so, we have heaps of resources for people researching their own family histories. Although with the rise of things like Ancestry.com and records being digitised, a lot of people are finding things. I guess we've noticed that the number of people who are researching family history have maybe gone down compared to researchers researching other things.
Right. That's interesting. And is your collection digitised?
It is.
Parts of it must be, are they?
Parts of it.
Yeah. Because, of course, it's really expensive and time-consuming also to digitise things,
It is. I think in this day and age, people think, digitising, you just get your phone out and take a photo of something. But actually, there's quite a big process to digitising papers properly and getting high resolution scans and images, and then storing those as well.
And making sure that the form of storage doesn't go obsolete.
We've just bought a new digitising camera thing for our herbarium in Lincoln. It was a worthy investment, but and it's amazing what they can do. But you're right, it's the equipment, then the time, and then
the people
storage.
Because if you're dealing with old documents as well, there must be a certain amount of, you can't just rip it through an automatic scanner that goes page by page. You have to actually have someone who carefully turns the pages so they're not damaged. And then I guess you need special kind of scanners that can cope with book spines and things as well.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's all that expensive equipment, specialised knowledge and time.
It does sound like a fantastically interesting job, though, eh? Because
Oh, no, I'd get too distracted. Oh, that's really
Yeah, I was
interesting.
just-
3 hours later and I've read everything and nothing's been digitised.
it's like
I
cleaning
think.
out your closet,
Yeah.
isn't it? You
Yeah.
start trying on books and archives instead of
Can I-
clothes.
Hocken, I will just answer
sorry,
that.
yeah.
Hocken
Oh, sorry.
Collections does have a website, Digital Collections. If you look up Hocken Digital Collections,
Right.
you'd find it
Yeah,
online.
that's a really good tip. We'll put that link in with the episode description so people can find it.
Awesome.
So who was Dr. Hocken? Does anybody know?
Yeah, well, he was actually a medical doctor. And He was
Right.
born in the UK, and he travelled over here. I'm sorry, I haven't memorised the date that he arrived
just
here.
sometime he arrived.
Sometime in the 1800s.
I would have thought.
Let's see if we can look it up. You
Yeah,
keep talking.
so he worked on as a doctor on ships travelling for a
okay,
little
yeah.
while, and then he decided he'd had enough of that, so he settled in Dunedin, I think he got off the boat and then he started up his private practice within the same week, and then he became the coroner in Dunedin.
Okay.
So he was.
I've got an update
okay.
here on dates.
Update us.
So, according to Te Ara, he was born on the 14th of January in 1836 in Rutlandshire, England. He was the third surviving son of Joshua Hocken, who was of Cornish descent, and his wife Anne Richardson of Yorkshire. His father was a Wesleyan minister, so there's all those ministers coming in. He arrived in Dunedin in January 1863. He secured the post of coroner for Dunedin. Actually, that's not when he arrived, that's when he secured the post of coroner. So 1863, so really late into that sort of Victorian period there, when they were wearing those nice big bell skirts that you associate with classic controversial movies such as Gone with the Wind.
I mean, I haven't seen a picture of Dr. Hocken wearing one of those, but I have seen a lovely picture of him with a top hat, and he also travelled a lot. And there's a story about Dr. Hocken that's very that relates to our history. With Te Tiriti, because he was the person who went to the government offices and found the sheets of Te Tiriti down in the basement and said they need better storage conditions than this.
Wow.
So he
See, that is an important person. That is a really, like, just if all he'd done in his entire life was that one thing, that is quite a big thing. Because imagine that we got to today and we didn't actually have any part of the surviving documents. How much crazy would that have caused?
Yeah, he obviously really cared that the history was preserved. So another thing he did was go over to England and go to the Church Missionary Society, and he basically got all the papers that related to New Zealand. So all the kind of the history of Marsden coming to New Zealand and
see, all
everything.
these big
And
names
he
that
was
are
like,
all
these
out-
shouldn't be in England. They should be in
No.
New Zealand. And he
Wow.
just brought them back with him.
Wow. See, we had a discussion a couple of weeks ago about Te Rā, the sail, which has been for a long, long time in the British Museum, and it's finally come back to New Zealand for a guest show in Canterbury, and I think it's now in Auckland still. And there's a lot of discussion about what the heck? Why is that even thinking about going back to Britain? And I feel like our Dr. Hocken would agree with me there. I think I'm fairly sure-footing there. Would be good to have that stay in New Zealand. Just a totally irrelevant sidetrack there onto other topic that has nothing to do with what we're talking today about. But,
So he before he died, he also he wanted his collection to be stored safely,
Right.
and he approached the University
of Otago here.
of Otago,
Yeah.
and so they ended up setting up a space for his collection,
Yeah.
to be available publicly.
Right.
It was the Hocken wing of the Otago Museum. So that
Yeah,
was
'cause it was that sort of the museum and the university were much sort of closer entwined at the time, weren't they?
They were, yeah. And so there was this wing of the museum built and dedicated to his things. But
Wow. Just so it grew it, did it? Or
it did, yes. So where we are now.
Because I always remember the Hocken building as being what the Richardson building is now. And I actually have a pair of socks which are designed by the amazing Morag from Vintage Pearls, and they're called the Hocken socks, and I've knitted them because they're absolutely fantastic. They've got really lovely ridges of twisted knit stitches up them, which is designed based on the crazy concrete slabs on the Richardson building, which have got those sort of diagonal stripes on them. And so I think, and obviously Morag does as well, always think of the Richardson building as the Hocken building because it had that Hocken library, I think, on the top floor maybe even.
I think it went over several floors.
Yeah, it was
so the Richardson building, which was, as you say, previously called the Hocken building, was purpose-built for the Hocken, the collections of the Hocken.
Oh, was it?
It was the second building so everything was moved from that Hocken wing at the museum, and then it was moved into this purpose-built building, or several floors of it. But then it just quickly outgrew that space too. So some of the material, as the collection grew, was moved to off-site storage, and then the place that we are now, which was previously the New Zealand Dairy Company.
Right. So it's a really lovely kind of Art Deco type building right there, but by the stadium, on the way to the stadium by Anzac Avenue.
It's between Te Rangi Hiroa College, the new Te Rangi Hiroa College, and Emerson's. So
that's right. It's perfect. Like, can you get any more perfect? You've got beer on one side and beautiful new architecture on the other side.
Exactly. And at the moment, it's
you can't take
liquids
into the Hocken.
No, but if you get dry and thirsty, you can always pop out for a little beer and then pop back in. Because I'm sure the lovely librarians there
I'm
would
sure
just
they would
remember where you were at. Are you allowed to sort of say, I've got all my stuff all sorted out here and I'm reading it. Can I pop back in 10 minutes?
I'm sure you can. It's a pretty treacherous road to get across.
It is. That's true. It is. It's true. Yeah, that's true. That's true. But actually, it's got really lovely parking behind it, and you can sort of walk along the side there on Minerva Street. It's actually really nice to walking up in Orfeo, the Leith Waters there.
Don't tell too many people about that parking though, eh?
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, so there's no parking there at all. It's horrible for parking. Just don't go there at all. You have to walk. Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I've totally distracted you as to where we were. So we were talking about Dr. Hocken.
I hope you know a bit more about Dr. Hocken now.
I feel like we do, because it's a name that sort of floats around all the time. And I hadn't quite realised, like, sometimes people's names get attached to libraries or buildings just because, I don't know what Richardson, whoever he was, did to earn being his name on the building, but I don't suppose that he created the whole essence of the reason that the building was built. He obviously didn't, because you just told us that it was built for the Hocken collection. But yeah, he's quite an amazing man, right? He's had 3 separate wings or buildings built for this collection that he started, and people like you are carrying on today because it's a living collection, right? So it's actually still growing all the time because you're still curating records as they come in. And if people have things at home, do you take people's donations? How does that happen? Do people just...
Yeah, well, we do. So you're right, the collection is constantly growing. We try and we're not like the National Library, which people have to give copies to the National Library when they publish something new.
Yeah, but that was a shock for me. I don't, when we did those. Just for those out here, Rauhina helped us with the moth guides when we were doing them. So she very lovely provided the Kai Tahu. Original, made sure that all the...
I think I did the translating from Kai Tahu dialect
you did too.
Into more generic dialect, wasn't that right?
That's right, yes, sorry. Now, I'm so confused. It's so long ago. Yes, you're right, you did. You went the other way, because Kormani wrote the original document in Kai Tahu, and then we translated that into English, and then you went back when we did the North Island ones and translated. Goodness me, what a mess. But what amazed me about that was that all of those booklets, because they had an ISSN number, had to go to the National Library, so they all got copies of them, which is fine. We were sending them to libraries anyway, but just that it amazed me that there was just this kind of rule that if you publish something, you have to send a copy to the National Library, which is great because it means that they've got a total full collection of all the things. But the Hocken, do they get some books as well?
Yep. So we try and it's so much easier to get books when they're being published as opposed to 100 years later, right?
That's true.
So if you're looking for things like
Gosh,
books
I don't know
of
now
poetry
if I
and all
sent
that
you
kind of thing,
if I sent you the guides.
we can check that on the catalogue later. But
Okay, cool. Thanks,
so we've
yeah.
got a published collection, which is kind of a library collection that's constantly we're acquiring new things, and sometimes people bring in their published kind of family histories and things like that, which are really
right.
useful as well. But also we subscribe to lots of magazines, New Zealand magazines, and we get newspapers in from...
So can people just go in and read the magazines?
Yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely. You just need to sign up for a Hocken card.
Yeah,
and then you
like a
can order
normal
them up.
library card so that
Yeah.
they know who you are and that you're...
But you can't take them home with you.
Yeah. No,
You're going to need a bigger building, I think.
I think you might be right. So we've got all these things. I love one newspaper that I love getting, because it's not just New Zealand newspapers. We also get some Pacific Island newspapers and
nice.
things. So the
Yeah.
Cook Island news comes in, and it's
Wow, see, that must
they
be
send
really
it from the Cook Islands,
interesting.
and I'm just like, this is cool. Then we've got our archives collection. So if people at home have significant things, yes, they can come in and talk to us, and our archivists will look over what's there and decide whether we can accept things or not. We don't accept everything, but
but that's really interesting. Like, because my great uncle just passed away, and he was 90. I think he just had his 93rd birthday. But I was doing some recording things with him, and just the things that he remembers. Like, he remembers when World War II broke out, and how he was sitting in the classroom when they told them that things had happened and stuff like that, which is like, to most of us, it seems like history. But I think there's just I was just wondering, like, there's like leashes and things and stuff like that, and it's kind of like family history, but because it's set in a wider context of what was happening then, it just actually seems like, wow, that's actually like first person account of how they felt.
Yeah, I believe there's a diary in there from a German soldier in the First World War.
In the Hocken. Oh, interesting.
There's some really interesting wartime diaries. Over lockdown, one of the things that I got to do was help transcribe some of the diaries and things like that. And it's just amazing. And, getting to kind of just read this handwriting from back in the day and hear people's kind of intimate experiences of what things are like.
And somehow it seems different if it's someone's actual handwriting, like someone had a pen in their hand and wrote it, and everyone's script's different to just reading something that they wrote that it was typed.
Yeah.
It's funny, isn't it?
And we've got
I'm just so nostalgic
significant
about
people's
things.
papers as well, like literary people like Hone Tūwhare's papers, and I think that's something that I connect to a lot, both those, wow, this is, Hone Tūwhare's writing, or, getting to see my own ancestors' signature on paper. There's a marriage register of my great-great-great-great-grandmother.
Wow.
And and her father also. So, like, seeing their marks on that paper is pretty amazing.
No, that is pretty cool. Did you always want to do this history type? Is that where you saw your life as a kid going? Have you always had an interest in this? How did you come to be the Māori archivist at the Hocken collection? It's quite a...
I didn't always want to do this, but it's funny thinking back on my own family history. I've got a lot of librarians in my family, and just being like, why did I not think of this earlier? But no, of course, I took a little bit of a circuitous route to get where I am today.
So you studied originally at Otago University, University of Otago.
I did. No, I grew up here in Ōtepoti,
Yeah.
and went to school through here. And after I finished high school, I went on to university. And originally, I was studying physical geography. I studied some geography papers, which is in the Richardson building, formerly the Hocken building. And I also studied te reo papers at Te Tumu, which is also in part of that building, the Richardson building.
Crazy,
so it's funny now. I'm like, oh wow, like these
Maybe
little
it was
symbols.
destined. I was like,
Maybe it
symbols
was meant to
pulling
be.
you into it.
And
Wow.
things that I really enjoyed in my degree, I got drawn towards the Māori studies side of things, learning te reo, and then also learning about the history of the language and education, about the Waitangi Tribunal, these, I guess, different aspects of Te Ao Māori. And I ended up graduating with a BA in Māori Studies because there's this funny little thing that the geography department has where all their papers count as arts papers and science papers.
So it's a really unique department because it bridges arts and sciences, and they have physical geography lecturers and they have arts, geography, humanities lecturers there, and they have a bit of planning and stuff as well. Sorry, planners. But yeah, it's this weird thing it's this unique thing where you can actually either do a BA or a BSc through the geography department, and you can cross credit those things. So that's interesting. So you started off as a geography degree and then kind of slid into BA in Māori studies.
That's right.
Wow,
Yeah.
That's interesting. And did you always envision that you were going to go to university, or did you, have you got a family history of being in university?
I do. So my dad went to university, and
Shout out to the Jim
shout
Fyfe
out
there.
Jim Fyfe. Yeah. So when my dad was studying,
Father's Day's gone. You know, that's
actually, I actually had a phone call with my dad on Monday because I'd forgotten to say Happy Father's Day to him. So
I see. Now you're making up for it with
so I'm
saying
making
shout
up
out on
with it
local
right now.
radio. Yeah. He's an amazing man. I'm sure he's an amazing father.
if those people that haven't heard of Jim Fyfe, just read something about sea lions in Dunedin and you'll find out more. But yeah, so when I was young, my dad was studying his master's at university,
Right.
and so I spent quite a lot of time both at the university and at the Otago Museum, funnily enough.
Right. So what was his master's in?
He studied zoology.
We should have him on the show and he can
Actually,
talk about him.
yes,
you
thank
talk about
you.
you. Sorry.
Yeah.
We'll have him on the show
It's
later
me
on.
now.
Yes,
It's Rauhina time now.
So I was around the university a bit, and I think my dad loves to quote this actually. Apparently, as a 3-year-old, I said, I don't know if I want to go to university. It doesn't look like much fun.
Yes, but then everything changed. So imagine at 3 you probably weren't reading, so it was just like, what are these people just sitting here doing boring stuff? They should be kicking a ball around or
I
something.
think I noticed how stressed everyone looked.
Yeah.
It's true. There can be a lot of stress around the universities, especially at different times of the year. But at the moment, it's absolutely gorgeous. It's got all those cherry trees flowering. And honestly, it's a really lovely place to de-stress if you can just take a walk and underneath the cherry trees with the
and
blossoms.
it's mid-semester break, so it's even better time to go visit the
right,
cherry
yes.
trees.
As we're recording this, we're actually on
Oh, yes.
mid-semester break. That's true. We are on mid-semester break. Though if you're listening to it on podcast, you've probably missed the cherry blossoms and mid-semester break. Sorry about that, guys.
I think the university was a really significant part of, I was born in Dunedin because my parents met in Dunedin. My dad was actually born in the far north,
Right.
and my mum was also born in the North Island, but both of them came to Dunedin. My dad came to go to university.
To study. Wow.
So
the university actually enabled you to be born. Wow. Thank you, University of Otago. Thanks, Rauhina. Hey, so we should get, I guess, on to talking about some of the research that you've been doing there, because you were showing me some amazing postcards that you've got there. So this is part of the work that you've been doing.
yes, so thanks for bringing that up. I brought these. So one of the big projects that I've been working on, and some people listening to the show may already know about the digitisation of the Herries Beattie papers.
Let's just before we get too much onto the digitisation of the Herries Beattie papers, let's have a brief who is Herries Beattie, because it's another one of those amazing people from about that same time, right? So born 1881, if my notes are correct, which was an amazing year, 1881. But it's sort of that turn of the century, and there's a lot of if you've done anything in Māori studies or anything, you will know the name Herries Beattie,
Especially Southern Māori.
Southern Māori.
So he was born in 1881 in Gore, and he was the son of Scottish immigrants. And he grew up in a family that was passionate about reading and things, but he also grew up among some tragedy as well. When he was about 1 year old, I think 3 of his siblings died in an epidemic. So he was kind of very aware of
the fleetingness of life. But
also, he seemed to have this strong desire to record things. So he was really interested in bird life. He noticed, how much had changed, obviously, since Europeans had first arrived in the landscape, and he was trying to record as much as he could about the native birds around where he lived.
And he's got that. There's that amazing book, Southern Māori, which is Herries Beattie, isn't it?
Traditional Lifeways of the Southern Māori. So I guess that's how people may have come across him. That was actually published after his death, but it was based on a project that he did in 1920. He was commissioned by H.D. Skinner, who was running the university, the
Otago
Museum at
from
the time.
the Skinner Annex.
Yeah, that's right. And so Beattie had previously gone and interviewed and collected all this information from Otago and Southland early pioneers, so Pākehā early settlers, to record down their stories, and he'd also tried to write letters to many Kaitahu people and hadn't got much of a response, and so he realised he needed to go and talk to these people. And so I think he was quite pioneering in his own way of doing oral history interviews, and he had such a deep respect for Kaitahu traditions as well. So he was paid some money by Skinner to go and into communities and talk to people and record down information. And he travelled by train and bike, which I love.
Isn't that amazing? So this is in the early part of the 1900s,
Yeah,
right?
so this is 1920-ish.
1920, so between the wars, basically. Yeah, wow. And I imagine actually back then there was probably more, there definitely was more ability to travel by train around Otago Southland than there is today, which is just horrifying to think about. But and possibly even by bike, because without all the massive cars on the road, it must have been easier to actually get along on some of the roads, even though the roads themselves probably were gravel and a bit rutted.
But okay, this is one thing I wrote, and I wrote a little article about it for the ODT. I got really obsessed with the idea of his bicycle, because he owned the same bicycle from around 1903 through to the 1960s.
Wow! And that's like 60 years of a bicycle, which was obviously heavily used, right?
And he replaced the tyres and he replaced most parts of it except the frame of it. But it was this Massey Harris bicycle from Canada that he wrote about. Just this famous bike that...
Where is this bike now? Is it in the Hocken collection?
I believe it's at the Waimate Museum.
Waimate?
Because he lived in Waimate for...
Oh, right. Okay.
So,
cool.
yeah.
Okay.
So
that's fun.
Yeah.
Oh, wow,
so
that's
he
amazing.
was,
so it still exists.
Born in Gore, lived in Dunedin, went to Palmerston North for a bit, and then came back down to Waimate, where he had a bookshop, and then was a kind of writer and for a lot of his life. Anyway, I could talk about Herries Beattie all day, but I don't think that's why you invited me here today.
No, we should get onto the point of this show. So this show is about Hoani Parata, and we've specifically asked you along today to record this show because you are giving this talk, which is presented by the Theology Program and Selwyn College, Te Maru Pū Manawa. Yeah. And it's the third of these Hoani Parata lectures, and it is honouring Reverend Canon Hoani Parata. And he also was born in 1881, which I just find amazing. So he is 1881 through to 1928. So he was not quite as long-lived as Herries Beattie, right?
No, he wasn't, but I also found that amazing. They were born within a month of each other.
It's quite crazy.
In 1881.
And 1881 is a very particular, like if you look at history, there's lots of things happened in 1881.
Yeah. So, Hoani Parata is quite Yeah, so the talk I'll be giving will be at All Saints Anglican Church in North Dunedin.
All Saints Anglican Church in North Dunedin. Do I know where that is?
It's the brick church. That brick church that's in front of Selwyn College.
Right, okay. There you go, people. And it's an open talk, is it?
It's a public lecture.
Public lecture, so anyone can go. And it is on the Friday the 13th of September.
5:30 p.m.
5:30 p.m.
And in it, so a little bit of context as to the lecture series itself.
Yep.
So Hoani Parata was actually a really significant person, and we can go into a little bit about his life.
Yeah.
But this lecture series has been created to celebrate him and also celebrate Māori theology, so understandings of theological thought from a Māori perspective.
So when you're saying theological thought, you're meaning Māori perspective on Christian theology or just Māori perspective on
I guess
the whole...
Wairuatanga, yeah.
You're going to have
Could be Christian...
I'm going to need more elaboration there. The spiritual world as a whole rather than just on the Christian. Because
he trained as a...
Yeah, because he trained...
He was an Anglican... He was an Anglican priest.
Yeah.
But
he must have had a very specific Maori lens on the being of an Anglican priest, I'm imagining.
Well, I'm interested in how they married those two things together, or were they that just separate in those days? I don't know.
Yeah.
Did you come across any insights about that?
Or are these all things that you'd rather just leave teasing me to the talk?
I want to leave a little bit of...
We don't. You'll have to wait. This is the build-up, not the talk.
So, we hold Hoani Parata's papers at the Hocken collections, which is why I've been asked to talk. I've been asked to talk about his papers and kind of what they show about his life. His quite amazing life, really, because he was the first Tahu person to be ordained as an Anglican.
Cool.
He was also the first Māori on the Anglican General Synod. And he came from quite a prestigious family. His grandfather, Tame Parata, will be quite well known. He was an MP in Parliament.
All right.
And
what's the significance of a synod?
That's the governing group, governing body of the organisation, of the church.
Of the church.
Yeah.
But it's like a local one, right? Or a national one?
No, you're talking about the national body.
So the national body,
remember, like in Victorian times, what was it? The oldest inherited the estate, the second one went into the church, the third one went into the military, something like that. So those people who got involved in religion were not, it was more prestigious, could one say, than what it is perhaps considered now. Yeah, right. So it was an amazing event, and hats off to him. This is no mean feat we're talking about here. Right. This is something quite significant to Tahu and the church as well. Not that I'm speaking on behalf of the church.
And I mean, he was quite well connected across the country as well. He went to Te Aute College, so he was sent off to Te Aute in the North Island to study. Then he came back down to Selwyn College down here and studied theology and became a deacon, and then was ordained as a priest. And he worked at St Paul's Cathedral for a little while.
Right.
But then he decided he wanted to go travelling overseas, and he went across to Spain and to England and different places overseas as well. So he was married over in England, and
because of course these are Anglican priests, right? So they can get married.
There are other priests that can get married as well, but
all right.
But he was also involved in the Young Māori Party.
Cool.
So while he was overseas, he also gave talks about Māori culture over there, and he actually published a book as well. So we'll be talking a little bit about that in the talk as well, well as looking at his papers, which include...
So when you say his papers, exactly.
Yeah.
What are his papers? Are they diaries? Are they
letters?
So there are letters, there's correspondence, yes. There are photographs, but there's also a whole big stack of his sermon notes. And so
That's a real insight into someone's brain,
Yes.
isn't it?
absolutely.
Thinking.
Yeah.
There's also things like his marriage certificate, his will, his certificates for getting ordained, and his reference letters when he was leaving the cathedral to go overseas. Kind of this reference letter for the people of overseas to accept him.
Right, yeah.
And
A passport, but...
Yeah,
No,
kind
no,
of-
no. A letter of introduction.
Letter of
So you
introduction,
would
Letter of
write-
introduction
Yeah.
that talks about his importance as a representative of Dunedin City. So
Wow.
yeah. Though when he came back from England in 1914, and he became the vicar for Riverton,
Right.
down at Oraka in Riverton. I feel connected to these because, I have whakapapa te Puketeraki, where he was born, and also significant connections to Oraka Aparima, so Riverton area.
Wow.
And
So it's quite nice that you're the one who's doing the research around it and kind of talking about him at this lecture series as well, because it's like a personal connection as well as a professional connection.
yeah, I might not be able to give as much insight into the theology, but I'm really excited to promote his papers, and I'm really hoping that there'll be a source for researchers who want to kind of learn more and
Yeah. Because it's quite a critical time, isn't it, in the kind of engagement between Pākehā and Māori, and just everything was so kind of changing in those years there as kind of industrialisation came, and then of course the war and the upheaval that meant for society in general. And I guess that also plays into his sermons there.
Yes, and I haven't read all of his sermons, but I will be highlighting some things from them.
But I imagine there's a lot, right? Because there's one every Sunday, right?
And he didn't. Yeah, he did repeat. I guess he kind of used the notes on different times sometimes, so it's not like every single one. But I find them quite. What I've read so far, I found some things very entertaining.
Was he a good speaker? Do we have any third-party notes on whether people thought he was a good orator or? I'm kind of imagining he is with a family history like that.
I think he was a very good speaker, and he died young. Relatively young. He was 49 when he died.
Yeah,
and when people wrote obituaries about him.
47.
Check
In
that.
his late 40s.
Yeah, he was in his late 40s.
Sorry, Ian, let's not quibble about the maths. But
Yeah. And I promise I'll get it right in the actual talk.
But that is quite, late 40s either way.
But people
Yeah.
referred to him and they said he had the potential of being a bishop. So, they wouldn't be talking about him in those ways unless he was well respected and obviously had some charisma and good at speaking.
And not just good at speaking, but what he was saying obviously resonated with people as well.
So another connection, which I found, was, so he went off to war, and he was a chaplain in the First World War for the Māori contingent in the war. So another thing that's within his papers is this little prayer book. It's all in Te Reo Māori.
Wow.
That was there for supporting the Māori soldiers in the war, which has hymns and prayers and things in it, which he obviously used while he was over there.
Yeah.
When he came back, though, he became the vicar at Gore.
Right.
So that's that connection with Beattie and him must have met at some point.
They must have done. So the same age, and it was a very small society back then. Even today, Dunedin, you can't walk down the street without meeting someone that you know. So,
yeah. And then he became a canon, which is kind of another level again in the Anglican Church in 1927. And then he was from 1927 to 1928 when he died. He became vicar at Whakatipu in Queenstown.
Right.
So he kind of, I find it really fascinating because, you don't necessarily think of this significance of Kai Tahu. Traditionally, yes, Kai Tahu were in these places, but he was a minister for all of the people in those places, right? It wasn't just a minister for Māori. He was a priest there at these churches in places like Gore and in Queenstown. And yeah, I think he was quite an amazing person.
Yeah. Oh, it's very interesting to hear. It's going to be very interesting to hear more about him and about his life.
Were there themes in his sermon? Could you pick out, or was it kind of like relating to events, or is it a mixture of that kind of stuff?
I don't want to go into it too much right now.
But we'll just say that, yes, it could be.
There are definitely themes, and I think he was quite interested in the theology and commenting on that kind of theology relating to the church calendar.
Yeah.
And so he obviously kind of went into depth. His handwriting, one thing that, he had lovely handwriting, but it's a bit more cursive than we would usually read today.
Right.
So it's just that
It's
little
really
bit slower.
It's quite hard to read old handwriting. And you sort of have to get your eye in to a particular person and how they were forming the letters to read it.
What do their, R's look like, or their T's or whatever?
It's quite amazing, It's obviously a huge body of work, because someone in that line of work obviously was writing a lot. So that's amazing, because you've got this huge source of material, but you've also got this huge source of material. So it's a lot of work to go through it all and kind of form where you're going. So yeah, but it does sound, and it's a particularly interesting time, I think, in the kind of formation of Aotearoa of New Zealand, with the society and the culture and where things were, and also I think for someone who's kind of dealing with that kind of spirituality, living across and being really thrust into probably the worst parts of World War I. I mean, there's some horrific things there, and that must really test your belief system, I would say. Just as someone from the title outside with no personal experience of either of these things. But it just seems to me that that's kind of a bit of a crux. But he obviously came back from the war experience with his beliefs still intact, because he was then still being actively promoted through the tiers of the Anglican Church.
For sure. And I think, those kind of formal religious groups and churches were really significant in those days.
Yeah.
And I guess what I'm finding fascinating about this annual lecture as it's been established is, like, what does it mean today, and how are our views changing and growing, and what can we learn from the past, but also we're not, grounding our looking to the past, but also what does that mean today in our context. The fact that Hoani Parata was, he was involved with the Young Māori Party, and he was speaking up about Māori rights in some ways in those days. He was someone who was thinking about those things then, 100 years ago.
Which just shows the length of time that people have been thinking about these things, and how much inertia there is in the system. That a lot of people think, why are we all upset about things now? But it's not. It's just once you've got some injustice or some there, it actually takes sometimes quite a long time for everyone in society to realise that this needs. I mean, how long was slavery there, for instance, as a totally out of the ballpark before people started? And slavery today, we just think it's absolutely ridiculous. How could anybody possibly think that? But for hundreds of years, it was just the normal. And obviously, all through that time, people were saying, "Hey, no, this is not normal, guys." But it actually takes quite a long time sometimes for society as a whole to go, what are we thinking, people?
I don't know, the English still haven't forgiven the French for 1066, so, yeah.
Well, I suppose there's all sorts of things. But, it's interesting, just specifically in the light of today's kind of political environs and what we're thinking about now. Hey, I am sure this is going to be an amazing talk, and we're very privileged to have you along today just to give us a taste of how it's going to be. Again, that talk is the 13th of September, Friday.
13th of September, Friday at 5:30 at All Saints.
At All Saints. And it's a public one. Just wander in there, have a look. It sounds absolutely interesting. And also the Hocken Library. I think I actually have never been in there.
What?
I know, it's ridiculous.
You call yourself a researcher.
I know, but I always thought it's kind of humanities based.
Well,
but
there are often great shows on, especially the art gallery upstairs. We've also, in the special collections, which is now connected to the Hocken, we also have the Janet Frame exhibition on at the moment. So I encourage people to check that out too.
See, now there's a tip, everybody. Yeah. Janet Frame collection. Hey, we're going to thank you very much for coming on the show today. And I think if you're out there and you've been listening to the OI podcast and you particularly like this episode with Rauhina, we think you'll also like our interviews with Jeanette Wikaira on Hone Tūwhare and with Prof Angela Wanhala on Mana Wahine, and I'm sure that both of those lovely ladies are very, very aware of everything that is in that Hocken building and archive there. Thank you very much for coming along today, Rauhina. It's been a pleasure.
Ka nui te mihi. Thank you.
Kia ora.
You've been listening to the OI podcast, the shout out for the arts, sciences and mataranga Māori.
You can support this podcast by becoming a member of the OI. Check out the Tahu Institute for Arts and Sciences on Facebook or our website.
If you'd like to listen again to this episode or others from the series, look for the OI podcast on OAR FM's website, oar.org.nz.
Brought to you by the Tahu Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Tahu branch of the Royal Society of New Zealand.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.